Lecture 11, Part 7. Hopefully this will be the last one. I won't guarantee it, though. So in 1936, Roosevelt will run for re-election. No big surprise there. The president almost always will run for re-election. His Republican opponent is a fellow by the name of Alf Landon. Now, I don't know much about Alf Landon, except that supposedly he was a really likable guy. I've heard that he was just one of those people that everybody thought highly of. But he's got a real problem. I mean, the Republican brand name is kind of tainted by what had happened with Hoover in the Depression, and Roosevelt's trying all these things to try to help people out through the Depression. So Alf Landon's kind of got a tough road to go, and you can see this in the election results. Roosevelt is in green. This is just an all-time electoral bloodbath. 61% of the popular vote. Was it like 98% of the Electoral College? So Roosevelt has been reelected overwhelmingly in 1936. Okay. Now, this of course means he keeps control of the Congress too, because the Democrats have done well riding on his coattails. And so Roosevelt could continue to work on New Deal stuff, but he's going to get bogged down in some other problems. Okay? So there's not like a third wave. There's not like a third New Deal. I mean, I'm sure probably new things came out, but they went with a lot of what they already had. One thing that distracted Roosevelt, it cost him some support, is he got into this battle with the Supreme Court. Now, I've told you the Supreme Court had already ruled the AAA and the NIRA unconstitutional for various reasons. And the problem was usually there was, four or five, I guess four horsemen, four very conservative judges on the Supreme Court who'd been appointed, in earlier times by Republican presidents, and they're voting against some of this stuff. Now there's some liberals on the court, like Louis Brandeis, but Roosevelt's worried that they might overturn some more New Deal legislation, and so somebody in Congress will introduce the Judiciary Reorganization Bill in 1937, but they're doing this, at the beck and call of the Roosevelt administration. The basic premise of this, and I've never read it deep into this because it never became law, so I'm not going to waste time learning about a proposal necessarily. The nuts and bolts of it is it would have allowed Roosevelt to name an additional Supreme Court justice for any justice who was over the age of 70. And they probably try to sell this with some kind of, smoke and mirrors. And some of these folks are getting old. They, we'd like to lessen their workload. You could get some new justices on the court. They could start learning under, the mentorship of these older folks. But what would have happened if this bill had passed? Roosevelt would have got to name 6 new Supreme Court justices. Now, has anyone ever got to name 6 justices at one time? Yeah, George Washington back at the very, 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 very beginning when they had to completely staff the first Supreme Court. Okay. So people see through this. They have all these reasons why they want to do it. But this becomes known as the court packing scheme. Okay. So, the 4 horsemen up there, G1, as in the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the 4 old conservative judges who's going to try to stop some of this New Deal legislation. Now here's where Roosevelt, maybe his reach exceeded his grasp. Get some visuals here. Obviously, Republicans would vote against this. Okay? It's seen as a blatant attempt to, sway the Supreme Court and make it a political body, which it is, by the way. But this is just like over the top. Okay? And so the Republicans, naturally enough, will be against it. But here's what else happens. There are some conservative Democrats who are against it. There are some Democrats, and remember, conservative Democrats tend to be Southerners. Well, I won't say there weren't any conservative Northern Democrats. Certainly possible. Seems likely there would have been a few, but particularly from the South. There are conservative Democrats who think that Roosevelt's going too far here. And they'll side with the Republicans to keep this bill from getting through. Okay? So this is a case, this is probably Roosevelt's first big political defeat. That he really wants this bill to get through, and the Republicans vote against it, and enough Democrats jump ship and vote with the Republicans to keep this bill from becoming law. Now, this is kind of the start of the coalition. Okay? There are conservative Democrats who realize, once you cross the aisle and work with the Republicans, you start going, the world didn't open up and swallow us. Maybe we can work with Republicans on other things. And so start to see this coalition between Republicans and some Democrats who think maybe Roosevelt's going too far. Okay. Next slide. Oh, there's Louis Brandeis. He's one of the liberal members of the Supreme Court. Right. So completion of a New Deal. What ends the New Deal? I've already told you there's really not like a third wave of New Deal. They just programs. They kind of just keep working with the ones they've already got. I'm not going to say that there weren't some new programs, but there's not like another big rollout of a bunch of stuff. A few things happened, though. In 1937, there's a recession. In the middle of a depression, you have a recession. So there's actually a definition of depression and a definition of recession. The economy was slowly recovering a little bit from the depression. And what happens is, there's people worried about how much money the government is spending, how much deficit spending. And so it looks like things are improving a little bit, so they cut back on some of the spending, and then there's another downtick. So they realize, okay, no, we've got to keep pouring money into this thing. And so, they start pouring more money back into the WPA and places like that. The Republicans, of course, want to call this the Roosevelt recession. Okay, so because they want to tie the economy to him. So there's the stock market crash at 29. Then things get really, really, really bad. They start spending all this money for the New Deal. Things start getting a little bit better. They back off a little bit to try to save some money. Things start slipping south again. So more money. Now, we see the Second Agricultural Adjustment Act passed in 1938. So Congress went back, fixed what was unconstitutional about the first act, and passed the second act. So the government stays in the business of subsidizing farming. Okay? Don't ask me what the differences is, because I really don't know off the top of my head. The book might touch on it. I bet it doesn't. And then there's the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, I mentioned this earlier when I talked about the NIRA, the National Industrial Recovery Act. I said it had some protections for employees in it, and then that law had been overturned. Okay, so some of those things get recycled back into the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, some things in the Fair Labor Standards Act, basically by this point, they'd already done a lot to get rid of child labor. Basically shut down child labor, instituted a minimum wage, also established the idea that there would be overtime pay for over 40 hours for most jobs. There's always exceptions. So establishes a 40-hour work week. After that, they're supposed to pay you time and a half. Now, that would be popular with workers. It would also possibly help with the jobs a little bit. Think about it. If you're an employer in a depression and you have 120 hours a week of work that needs to be done, and people are desperate for work, and you have two employees, you could tell them both, well, I need you to work 60 hours a week. Well, now with a 40-hour work week, you're going to have to hire a third person because you can't afford to pay all that overtime. So this would help protect workers from being taken advantage of by bosses. Now, every law you got to consider, it's going to help some people, it might hurt some people. Maybe you're the young person trying to save up for a house that doesn't have a family or anything, and you don't mind working 60 hours a week and putting that extra money aside, and now that's been cut off to you. So, like a lot of laws, it helps some, probably hurts some. This is one of the problems with laws. Anyway, the Fair Labor Standards Act is passed in 1938, and that's really the last big New Deal type legislation you see. Because what's going to happen increasingly after 1938 is Roosevelt's attention is going to be taken up more and more by foreign affairs and things that are happening overseas. Gosh, I wonder what those might be. Alright, there's some more artwork under the New Deal. Not very good artwork, it doesn't look like to me. Okay, a few other things about Roosevelt real quick. He was seen, let me say this. Roosevelt was not a big leader and mover and shaker in the civil rights movement. Okay? I don't necessarily know that he was hostile towards them, but he had a lot on his plate just dealing with the Depression. And some of the bills that were passed did not, do as well for the black community. For instance, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Okay? If you're going to pay a landowner to take some of his land out of production, and a lot of blacks and whites in the South are tenant farmers or sharecroppers living on someone else's land, and now that person's going to get paid to take that land out of production. Guess what land he's going to take out? The part you're living on. So a triple A ended up hurting a lot of the poor blacks in the South who worked in agriculture. Okay? And some of the programs weren't, as open to blacks as they were to whites. But Roosevelt did do some things that showed he was more, friendly towards African Americans or blacks, if you prefer. Whereas Wilson, the prior Democratic president, had helped segregate some of the federal workforce. Roosevelt, for instance, here's this lady here, Mary McLeod Bethune. There's an E there at the end that's covered up. Roosevelt appointed her to a position with, if I recall, the NYA, the National Youth Administration. So it's not a super high-level position like a cabinet-level position, but it's a fairly prestigious high-level position, which is she's a woman. Okay, Roosevelt also had the first female cabinet member, a lady named Frances Perkins. Okay? So he actually had a female in his cabinet, and now he's appointing blacks to government positions. So he's certainly more friendly towards the black community than prior Democratic and Republican presidents. This will be one of the things that helps start shifting the loyalty of the black population from the Republican Party over towards the Democratic Party. But I'm running out of time. I'll have to stop here, and then we'll come back and we'll finish this thing up.